A few years ago, not so long ago, a few years ago, I was on the overground going to Liverpool Street with a friend of mine. Her name is Roshni, and she had just finished her PhD at UCL. And unlike her school days when she would be dressed in jeans or slacks and a jumper and a backpack with her computer and other things in it, she was going to some important meetings in central London after her PhD, and she was dressed in a nice blue dress, nice low-heeled shoes. Her long straight hair kind of framed her olive-toned round face, showing that she is Chinese. She's from Taiwan originally. And in contrast to that, I was dressed kind of like this, a little shabbier probably, gray hair and gray beard hanging out. And we were quite a contrast, I think, to anyone who cared to look. More important, though, is we were facing each other sitting in the chairs, and behind her, facing me, was a young man, big, strong man, talking in his phone, yelling in his phone, listening sometimes. He was yelling things like, "I know, but what the F, hell, I'm not a monk." And then he would be listening, and as he was listening to the person on the other end, I found out later it was his girlfriend he was talking to. As he was listening to her, he would be hunched over as if he's a rugby player waiting for the scrum to start. And I was glad for his girlfriend that she was on the other end of the line, not just sitting across from him at the table. He seemed to be in quite a mood. And he was going on and saying again and again, "I know, but what the F, I'm not a monk." And my friend Roshni was calm and either looking ahead or looking out the window, ignoring it as well as she could. I couldn't ignore it very well. And after the third or fourth time of him saying, "I know, but what the, I'm not a monk," I stood up, went up to him, close to him across the seats and said, "But I am a monk." He looked at his phone, said, "Hold on a minute," rushed around with me, and I see this man, big guy, his arms are as muscular and big as my legs. His chest is like, like an elephant, and his legs are like pillars. And the temperament he had, I've just described to you. And I thought, what have I done? But fortunately, as he ran around to talk to me, he only said, "Are you a monk?" And I said yes, thinking that I'll now describe what it's like to be a monk and what meditation is like. But then before I could say more than a word or two, he said, "Are you a Shaolin monk?" I said, "No, I'm not a Shaolin monk." "Do you teach martial arts?" And then I understood that what he wanted was somehow, some way that he could make himself feel more powerful, shall we say. And actually, as I look around this room, I know only a few people here, but if I could read your minds, probably each of us wants to find one way, some way to be more powerful in some way, find some deeper meaning in life in some way. I described to this young man, what meditation's about. By this time he had calmed down. And the few people who had been looking at us, wondering what's going to happen, they had gone back to their telephones and their newspapers. And I described to him for a few minutes what meditation's like, how it can help you, and things like that. And he eventually got off his stop, I think, at Bethnal Green. And we shook hands and said we'd hopefully meet in the future. Now, we went down to Liverpool Street, and my friend Roshni had some appointments. We were walking around in central London for a while. And amidst all the big buildings and the rushing cars and the rushing people and the narrow streets, I felt actually quite calm compared to the interaction I had had with this young man on the train. And I was thinking about him and thinking about other people I've met along the way. And I have classes and I have personal meetings with a lot of different people. And it's funny to me how someone might be having problems with their life, either relationships, job, school, meaning in life, whatever. And they come to a monk to ask for some advice about their problems, when their problems, as I say, have to do more with things in the world. And sometimes as I'm talking to them, I may end up giving some general advice, something like, well, maybe you need to try a little harder, maybe you need to think deeper about what you're doing. And sometimes I may give more specific advice, like, well, you should study more and party less. So depending on who I'm talking to, I give that type of advice, whatever is needed at the moment. But as I said, I often wonder, why is it that people come to a monk to find advice, to find guidance for problems in the world? It may be that they also realize that they need to find a deeper meaning in life. I think everyone wants to find some deeper meaning, some inner peace. I'll talk about this more later. But we don't always have a framework to put it in. Our world, the world we grow up in, each individual, may not give us the framework, as I said, the idea of the fact that we can find more meaning in life, we can find deeper peace if we look inside. Of course, a good job is great, a good place to live, a good relationship, a good family. These are wonderful things, and I wish that for everyone. But along with that, as this man on the train seemed to dimly realize, we need to find something deeper, something more meaningful. His girlfriend, I think, realized that because it seemed that she wanted him, instead of wanting him to bulk up, she wanted him to settle down a bit. And of course, he was resisting that as I could well tell by his angry, profane language to his girlfriend. Anyway, back to the man on the train. We shook hands, as I said, at Bethnal Green. I gave him my card. I said, "My name is Dada Jyotirupananda." He shook my hand and said, "My name is Mr. Animal." He was a performance artist, by the way. And given what his name was, and given his physique and his temperament, I was very glad that we were friends. So life goes on, and as I left Mr. Animal, I was thinking about the things I've just described, but as might be in anyone's mind, how do we find a deeper meaning in life? How do we find what we need in life? I recall when I was very young, maybe 7 or 8 years old, there was one time, maybe it happens to everyone, when I was in very frustrated mood. Probably my parents wanted me to do something terrible like study or clean the dishes or something like that. And these things happened a lot when you're young. You're in the world, but you don't really have the control that you'd like when you're a young child. And one day I remember my parents must have been out, and I was laying on their bed and just thinking, moaning about the world, wondering why are all these terrible things happening to me. 7 or 8-year-old boys or girls in middle-class families don't usually have too many terrible things happening to them. But when you're 7 or 8 years old, even a small thing can seem terrible. So I was laying there on the bed, kind of internally moaning, why are all these things happening to me? Why is life going this way when I want it to go that way? Then I was quiet for a minute, and I heard a voice inside. And this voice said something like, "Don't worry, wait a little bit. It will be all right. Just wait a while." The voice was no one that I recognized. The accent was a neutral accent. The tone of the voice, the voice itself, I couldn't place it with anyone I knew, but it was a calm voice. It was a deep voice. It was a slow, methodical voice. And he said, as I said, it was a male voice, and as I said, the voice said something like, "Don't worry, wait a bit. It will be okay." Anyway, that calmed me down for a little bit. It didn't solve my problems, but at least for a little bit of time, I felt some reassurance. A voice had come from somewhere. I felt some reassurance that, yes, things will somehow get better. Although at 7 or 8 years old, my world was very small, and I couldn't imagine how things could get better. But eventually they did. However, as life went on, I grew up. I finished elementary school, went through high school, went through all of the trials and tribulations and adventures and joys of a young boy growing up. And I forgot about that voice pretty much. Once in a while, when I was in a quiet, lonely place, I might think about that voice, but generally life was around me and I wanted to be engaged in life. Things were exciting, things were scary, things were adventurous. So I forgot about that voice. Eventually I started university, and in an unpredictable way, not the voice, but the message behind the voice did come back. This leads to the story, another story I want to start with. And of course, this is all leading up to me gradually becoming a monk. It doesn't happen overnight. As I indicated in the beginning, to become a monk or to find any deep path in your life, any meaningful path, it takes time. So in my first week in university, I was sharing a room in the dorms in the university halls with another fellow. I'd never met him before. And then one day I'm sitting there just reading a book. Before classes had started, we were there for about a week before classes start, getting prepared and signing up and all. And I was reading a book and knock on the door. "Hello, come in." Fellow came in. He was looking for my roommate. They were from the same hometown, from the same school. We talked for a minute or two. I didn't find out much more about him than his name. And he seemed like a friendly man, well-built, handsome, relaxed, at ease. And we talked for a minute or two, as I said. Then he went away, and a day or two later he came back again looking for Dick, my roommate. And again, I was sitting there with my legs sprawled out, reading a book in the sun in my room. And he came in. His name was Kaler, by the way, Kaler Wadlington, an unusual name. And I'm sitting there again reading this book, and he asked for Dick. I said, no, he's not here. And then he said, in a bit of a sharp voice, but more of a firm voice, he said, you should get up and go out. You'll have all the time you want to read when classes start next week. Now, Kaler, I believe, forgot about that comment probably within 1 minute of leaving the room. But I thought 2 or 3 things went through my mind. One is, yes, actually I should get out. Instead of reading a book in the middle of a sunny, warm day, let me go outside. But Kaler had planted some seed in my mind that went much deeper than just going outside and playing football with the guys. Somehow that comment stirred something up inside of me. Some sort of laziness or laxness, some sort of passivity started to slowly move out of my mind just from that one comment of his. And I realized gradually, it took me some time to realize what had happened. It wasn't anything cosmic, but it was something that hit me very strongly. And gradually I realized that we do need to get out. We need to get out of the box that we're in. Whether that box is a room that you're in, an idea or a value, or whether that box is the world that you live in, the values you have. Somehow we need to get out of our boxes. And I think at every stage in our life, we should, once in a while, look at ourselves and think, am I doing the best thing I can? Rather than the most comfortable thing I can, am I doing the best thing I can? The best thing, as I found in my life, is not always the most comfortable thing. So Kaler, unintentionally, I'm sure, got me out of one box, a box of passivity, a box of just let it go. Kaler had a big meaning in my life, though, for a long time after that. I got to know him a bit, and I'd go down to his room. He had a single room, which was unusual in those days. He was lucky, and we would talk for a while. Sometimes we'd talk for hours. No doubt our conversations were longer than they were deep, but still, talking with him, gradually I started getting the feeling that there's more to life than what I found. Life is not just about finishing school, getting a job, getting a house, getting married. These are important things, as I indicated before. But somehow for each of us, no matter how we live our life, married, single, a monk, whatever you do, a teacher, a soldier, an athlete, a musician, whatever it might be, anything else, whatever you're doing, I encourage anyone to think along the way, once in a while, take the time and think, am I doing the best I can? Is there more meaning I can find in life? Is there more fulfillment? And perhaps most important, is there more that I can give to life? So Kaler first got me thinking out of the box, and then he introduced me to a couple of other things that actually changed my life. One of them is something that maybe I shouldn't be talking about as a monk, but one day I was in his room. This was our first year in university. And I went down to visit him, and he was kind of quiet. The curtains were closed. He was sitting on the floor. And he wasn't much in a talking mood, unusual for him. He wasn't a gabbing type person, but always we had nice, ongoing conversations. But on that particular day, something was different, and I couldn't quite tell what it was. And I thought, well, Kaler's pretty quiet now, maybe he wants to be alone. So I started thinking, well, maybe I should leave. But at the same moment, I could almost see the thoughts going on in his mind, his brain turning over. And then he said to me, he said, have you ever smoked marijuana? And I said no, and so he taught me about that, and it was an interesting feeling. That first time, maybe not much happened, but gradually I started feeling, as I met Kaler more and more, with more than just the interest of talking, now that he'd introduced me to a new part of life, I started feeling sometimes that I was like, in a way, looking at the whole world from above, like you're in a helicopter looking all over London, and you can turn your head this way, this way, this way. And if I do that right now, I don't see much of London. But if you're in a helicopter or a plane, you can turn your head and see a lot of London. And in that way, in a similar way, I could somehow see the world from different colors than I'd seen before, different viewpoints, different perspectives than I'd ever seen before. I started to realize that there's something more to life than what I had experienced so far. And so this was an opening up of my life also. However, Kaler and I went our separate ways over the summer, and in those days, long before email and being teenage guys, you don't write letters much to each other. So in the winter we came back, and he had changed to a new building in the halls, and I eventually found him. And when I went to see him, again, I felt there was something a bit different about him. He seemed more calm, more composed than he was before, more relaxed in a natural way. Well, over the summer, he'd done some traveling. He used to travel a lot. In high school, when he was 16, 17 years old, he would take his motorcycle and go all the way across the US to California. That was maybe 3,000 or 4,000 kilometers from where he lived. He'd surf for a couple of weeks, and 2 or 3 weeks a month maybe, and then he'd drive his motorcycle back. This summer he hadn't done that, but he'd engaged in something rather than something external. He had engaged for the first time in something internal. He asked me, he said, "Have you ever heard of yoga?" Now, to me, to say yoga, it might have been as if he was talking to me in Polish or Italian or some other language. Maybe I had heard the word yoga, but it meant no more to me than if someone had talked about, rocket science or drilling in caves for salt or diamonds or coal or whatever they drill for. It was just very foreign to me. But as I said, something about Kaler's demeanor, something about the way he was, struck me as the way I would like to be. He seemed more calm. He seemed more relaxed in a natural way. So he started talking to me a bit about yoga exercises, but primarily that summer he had learned something called meditation, which is part of yoga. In my talks that I give, classes I give, I often give one class on what I call the big picture of yoga. And when we think of yoga, we often think of the exercises we do, and there's countless types of yoga in the modern world. I can't even count all the types of yoga there are. But the word yoga, does anyone, out of curiosity, does anyone know what the word yoga means if we translate it to English? Well, it would translate to English in various ways, but the basic translation is it means union or unification. Now, we live in the United Kingdom, so apparently a long time ago there were various smaller kingdoms, and maybe 1 or 2 strong kings united all of them into the United Kingdom. My home country is the United States. Separate states, which originally came from this country, eventually decided they would have more security, better welfare if they were united together. So yoga means to bring things together. But what it means is not so much physical, but rather human beings have 3 parts to them according to yoga or meditation philosophy. We have our body, which is most obvious. We have our mind, which you can't quite find on an X-ray machine, but I think we all know something up there is thinking, something up there is feeling. And it's not just the brain, although the brain may be a recording device for our feelings, our thoughts. And besides our body and our mind, we have what we might call the spirit. Now, the spirit is something which is very intangible, very hard to describe, and one may just have to accept it, one may have to understand it. I found through meditation that I can, shall I say, identify it. So the idea of yoga is that we have these 3 parts of ourselves, but they don't always work together. My body may have certain desires, my mind may want to do something else, and my spirit, which is fairly inarticulate compared to the body or the mind, the spirit may guide us if we're sensitive to it. The spirit may guide us to find, as I'm talking about, a deeper meaning in life, to find a deeper sense of love, a deeper sense of peace, a deeper sense of what direction I want in my life. So classically, the word yoga is a matter of integrating, or shall we say organizing, the body, the mind, and spirit so they're all working together for one similar purpose. What is that purpose? Well, we'll get to that a little later, but the purpose of human life is actually the same for everyone. It doesn't mean getting the best job. It doesn't mean becoming famous. These aren't bad things, but there's a deeper meaning to life that we all want. And talking to Kaler in those days, in our second year in uni, talking to him, he would give me some books to read. I would, through his advice, go to a lecture by one or another speaker or teacher. And I gradually started to find out these things that I'm talking about. I started to find out gradually that there are ways that I can empower myself that don't necessarily mean getting the best grades or being the best weightlifter or the fastest runner or anything like that. I started to find out that by using my mind, focusing my mind in a deeper sense than we normally do, that I could find a deeper meaning, and as I say, I could find more empowerment in life. The primary part of yoga, of course, as I'm indicating, what I learned from Kaler is meditation. And as I said, the meditation, not the yoga exercises, are what had changed him over the summer from being a healthy young man with a lot of outward energy to a man who was more calm, more quiet, more focused. At the end of the school year, Kaler went to India and he stayed there for 6 or 7 years, I can't remember. He had some very interesting experiences. But I stayed in university, I stayed in my town, gradually I left, but he had planted a seed in me that made me feel, yes, I can do meditation. And slowly more of my friends were starting meditation, and I would go, as I say, to some classes or to some lectures by different people, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. And I would think maybe I'd sit in a class and do 5 minutes of meditation, and to me that was, a challenge which I had accomplished. I felt good. But I could never quite get into meditation completely. One time, one exercise I found out about, I thought would be quite nice, quite interesting. In this exercise, and some of you may know about it, you take a candle, say a tea candle like this, set it in front of you, have the room dark, be in a quiet place, and just stare at the candle minute after minute after minute. So one evening in the dorms, in the halls, my roommate was out for the evening. So I locked the door so no one would come in and disturb me. I set the atmosphere properly, got some sort of small tray or something and put the candle there, turned off the lights and lit the candle. And I was just thinking, now some minutes will pass, some time will pass, and I'll get certain realizations, certain enlightenment. Perhaps I'll be able to see past lives, or I'll have deep memories that I never realized before. I'll have visions of whatever sort of things. And I thought, just I'll sit here minute after minute after minute till that happens. So as I say, I sat down, the door was locked, lit the candle, and I sat there for about as long as I was quiet right now, and that's all I could sit for. I had no patience to sit for any longer. I blew out the candle, got up, unlocked the door. A minute before that, the door had been kind of a security for me so I wouldn't be disturbed. But now the door was a barrier. So I went out and just found some people and did whatever I could. I had about that much patience to do anything. That exercise was one of the messages I got along the way that told me that I need to somehow develop more patience. Intellectually, rationally, logically, I knew that meditation and yoga type exercises would be something good for me. But as I said, as of yet, I had no patience. Of course, the idea of being a monk, which the title of this talk is about, the idea of being a monk was nowhere in my mind at that point in life. I had probably never known any monks. When I was growing up, probably all of my good friends, my best friends, were Catholic, and they mainly went to what we called parochial schools, meaning Catholic schools. And their education was better than us, and they would often tell me, kind of jokingly, sometimes sadly, about the run-ins they'd had with the nuns or priests in their school. 3 minutes? Okay. And it didn't sound very nice, the paddles and scoldings and things like that, which in the public schools, we didn't have anything like that. It was illegal by that time to do any corporal punishment on kids. But so my relationship to monks at that time was very remote. How did I ever become a monk? Well, let's go on a little more and I'll get to that. Now, the first step, as I'm saying, is getting into meditation. For me, that was the first step. Again, just to repeat, I never had any idea that I would be a monk at that point, but I did have some feeling gradually. Kaler had planted the seed, and other people along the way had inspired me in different ways. But meditation, it was something I wanted to do, but how could I do it? As I said, at that time in my life, I was getting a lot into drugs, soft drugs. I never was shooting needles or anything like that, but it was quite a big part of my life. And I remember one time, Kaler had gone to India already. I was living in another house with some friends at that time. I decided I've got to stop taking drugs now for a while. And I said I'll give myself a 2-week limit, and I won't take any drugs, any marijuana, any hashish. That's mainly what I took. I say for 2 weeks, I'm not going to touch it at all. And I went those 2 weeks. By the end of those 2 weeks, my mind was as if I was a very old, frail person with brittle bones. Any fall on the floor would break my bones. And in the same way, any nervous tension would break my brain or my nervous system, whatever. I was so tense, so tight. So at the end of the 2 weeks, I went home, took a few puffs of marijuana, and all my problems vanished like a puff of smoke. And then I realized that if this is what I need to keep myself under control, something is wrong. All of a sudden I realized, yes, I should do meditation. And it was just natural, it was just perfectly logical at that point that I would take up the meditation. So I went to a course that was being taught by one popular meditation group at that time. And it was very, in a way, dry, the information, but it was logical, it was rational, it was to the point. And I realized at the end of the talk, maybe it was an hour or whatever the class was, at the end I realized, I was walking home and I realized, I'm going to start meditation. I was about 20 years old at that time. I realized, I'm going to start meditation, and I'm going to do meditation for the rest of my life. If anyone had heard me say that, I kept it in my mind, but if anyone had heard me say that, they would have thought, oh, he's just talking, he's crazy, what is he talking about? And half of me said to myself, oh, I'm just talking, I'm just crazy, what am I talking about? But there had been something about what Gonzalo said, something that had built up from all the books I'd read, all the talks I'd gone to, that made me realize that yes, now is the time for me to do meditation. And I had enough logical background, no experiential background at all, but I had enough logical background to realize, yes, I will start meditation. And that was when I was 20 years old, not exactly yesterday, and I've been doing meditation every day of my life since then. Question might be, what was it that made me realize that I was ready for meditation? There's a lot of answers to that, a lot of possible answers. But one thing, going back to the drugs, and I guess what I'll add right now is that a week or so after the course, I had an appointment with the teacher, one of the teachers, and we met and she taught me the meditation. Very simple process, quite much more simple and basic than the meditation I teach now. I've moved on to another type. As I told you the story about going 2 weeks without taking any drugs and how I was just going crazy almost until I smoked some marijuana for a little bit. Then I was fine again. Well, I took the meditation course. I learned the meditation from the teacher. And from that day on, I never had any attraction to drugs of any sort at all. Why is that? Even till today, I can't say why that was. There was no, I didn't have any visions. I didn't, there was no lightning that struck me, no deep realization, but just some quiet sort of understanding, I guess, was in my mind, in my heart, you might say. And I didn't even say, I don't need this anymore. It's just, I didn't need it anymore. The meditation just turned my life around in one day. So, another story about years later, I had a confirmation of the value of giving up drugs and the value of meditation. At the point I'm going to talk about now, it was maybe 13, 14 years later than when I learned meditation, and I was back in my hometown. By that time, I'd lived in different places in the US. I'd been a volunteer for years with our meditation society, and finally, lo and behold, I had taken the step to be a monk, and I'll talk more about that shortly. And I was back in my hometown. This town was called Bloomington, Indiana. It's not the town I was born in, a university town, very beautiful place. And I was walking around the town. I hadn't been there in many years. And I happened to go in a bookstore just to look at the books, something I like to do. And I saw a friend of mine in there that I'd known in the early days, a guy named Carl. Now, when I was young in university, Carl had been one of the top, you might say, drug dealers among the students. And he was a very sharp man, very cool, always had something good to say. People respected him for his manner and for what he did. And he was intelligent also, quite intelligent. I hadn't seen him in many years, as I say, and now I walk into this bookstore. I'm dressed more or less like I am now, and I see Carl there. And I go up to him and start talking to him, and I see that Carl is completely dead in his eyes. You can look at anyone, a friend or someone you've met for the first time, and by looking at their eyes, you can get some feeling for them. You perhaps can tell that they're bored, that they're happy, that they're sad, they're curious, whatever it might be. But primarily, you can tell if they're alive or not. I don't mean physically alive. If they were not physically alive, their eyes wouldn't be open, probably. So Carl was certainly physically alive, but there was something about him that was dead. As I think about it, we talked for a few minutes. I found out he was kind of a gopher for the man who owned the bookstore. He was probably making a little bit of money and not doing much more with his life. But all those years of drugs, which I had given up, fortunately, partly thanks to Gonzalo, partly thanks to just the way my life was going, Carl had never done that. And now his life, I think, he had, I won't say it was completely written off. Who knows, maybe later he did change his life, turned his life around. Who knows? But at that time, it was a very good confirmation to me that I had made the right choice, partly to do meditation, and then years later to become a monk. Now I think it will be a good time to take a little bit of a break. And what we can do is a little bit of a meditation exercise, and then we'll get on to the next part. And I'll, let me see if I can bring the seat over here easily. So, okay, this will go for 5 or 10 minutes. We'll see how long it seems to take. And does anyone here do meditation, like any sort of regular practice of meditation? Okay, and a few people. Maybe later, I don't know if there will be time. It would be nice to have individual conversations and see what brings you here, for one thing, and also what's meaningful in your life. But there may not be much time for that. But I hope that afterwards we can keep contact. Either perhaps you would come to classes or we would meet other places. But for this, this is what I might call, not exactly meditation, but you might call it kind of a pre-meditation exercise. Now, for meditation, what do you think is the most important thing we need to do?
Open the mind.
Sorry?
Open the mind.
Okay, he's saying open the mind. What else would someone say?
Sit still.
Sit still. That's okay. Any other suggestions?
Relax.
Relax. Okay. These are all very good comments, although not all meditation is about stillness. Some meditations are what they call walking meditations. You might be in a garden or a park or even in a room, and you just walk, perhaps with the idea of just observing things closely instead of the way we normally walk without hardly seeing anything. And that's a nice type of meditation exercise. But probably, in my mind, the most important thing we need to do to meditate is to breathe. That's pretty important in most people's lives, I think. So let's, we're not going to have enough time to go through any proper breathing instruction. Most of us know something about breathing, although there are good ways to breathe and there are ways that are maybe not so good to breathe. So let's just take a moment to sit comfortably but straight and close our eyes. I usually say we should sit still, but on this boat it may be hard to sit still, but at least we can sit with our eyes closed and sitting straight. And now for a moment, just observe your breathing. We should breathe through our nostrils if we can. So with your eyes closed, pay attention to your breathing at the tip of your nose. Observe the breath going in and out. Don't worry about how rapidly or slowly you're breathing or how deep or shallow you're breathing. Don't worry about that. But just observe your breathing at the tip of your nose. And now, your mind hopefully a little quieter. Think about me. That is, think about yourself. We won't do this for a long time, but think about what's important to you, what's valuable to you. What direction do you want to go in life? how do you feel about yourself, others, about life? As I say, think about me in whatever way that comes. Think about yourself. This type of thing, even just sitting and focusing on your breath for a minute or 5 minutes or 10 or whatever amount of time, can be a nice way to calm down, to center yourself. Perhaps you have a presentation at work or some difficult thing you have to do. If you have a meditation practice, great, do that for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you want. But if not, just sit calmly, watch your breath, like we were doing now, and you'll probably find it relaxes you a little bit. And I've found that if I've got some difficult thing to do, a class, a presentation, talking to someone about something uncomfortable or difficult, sometimes just taking that moment to relax is more productive than analyzing what I'm going to say or what I'm going to do. The mind will absorb or let you do what you need to do. If you let the mind do what it needs to do, or if you let the brain do what it needs to do, things will probably get done pretty well. But if you block the mind by saying, oh no, what if, oh no, what, how, who, what, then you're probably confusing your thought process more than anything else. So often, as I say, if you just let yourself relax, the right thing will happen for you. Yeah. Okay, so I think maybe there weren't many questions a few minutes ago, so I'll talk a bit more, then we'll have some time for Q&A, and we'll do a little bit of meditation. So the question still is how I became a monk. And at this point in my life, I realized, when I started meditation, I realized, yes, meditation is what I want. But I had no further projection of it. I'll tell some stories. One, when I think what I'm going to tell now happened probably before I started meditation. But as I said, I'd read a lot about it. I knew a lot intellectually about meditation. And at one point, a famous Sufi teacher came to my town. Is anyone here familiar with Sufism? It's a mystical, in a sound bite, I'll say it's a mystical practice, spiritual practice that's associated with Islam. But I believe that Sufi practices and theory predate the Islamic religion by a long time. But somehow it's become associated with Islam. And it's a very, I have friends here in London and other places who are very active in Sufism, and I feel it's a very pure practice. It can be very good. There's different styles of Sufism. But one time in my town, a man named Pir Vilayat Khan came to visit us, and he was a very famous, perhaps the most famous Sufi teacher at that time. His father had kind of restarted Sufism in the West, West meaning Europe, America, places like that. And Pir Vilayat was very, very respected and a very wise man, I felt. So he had been in my town for a few days, and night after night I went to see his talks and the presentations he and his people gave. And at the end of one presentation, I was a fairly brash young man. I didn't really consider who I might be talking to. And I went up to him and I said, "Sir, have you ever had samadhi?" Does anyone here know what samadhi is, or are you familiar with that idea? Samadhi, the Sanskrit word literally means to become the same as your goal. So if your goal is to be the richest person in the world, then samadhi might be you've got all the money in the world, or a lot of the money. You feel completely at peace with yourself. Primarily though, samadhi, actually it's a spiritual experience or a spiritual practice where you feel oneness with the universe. We use words like self-realization, salvation, words like that. It can indicate the highest spiritual realization. So I very brashly went up to this wise, respected man. To me, he was an older man, but he was probably younger than I am now. And I said, "Sir, have you ever had samadhi?" I was like, if he was here and I'm there where you are, he kind of looked off in the corner for a moment. Then he went and he pressed my arm very firmly for a moment. And he said, "Everybody feels something." And I was a little bit disturbed or sad about that answer because I wanted a yes. He was like a superstar of spirituality, of yoga and all. And I was like a little kid, and so I wanted to hear some dramatic, amazing story. But all he said was, everybody feels something. Later on, after I started meditation, I kept that comment of his, I kept it in my mind. In fact, I still remember it now, of course. And later on, as I got a little more experience in spirituality and meditation, I started to realize that yes, everybody does feel something. That's what life is. Life is feeling. Life is impressions. Life is sensations. But what you do with your feelings, with what you feel, that's what makes you wise or not wise. And he was too humble and probably too wise to give me a direct answer, because it would have been like me getting his autograph, and it would have been just something I would have just, I wouldn't have appreciated him anymore if he had given me a straight ahead answer. So he gave me a wise answer. Everybody feels something. And whatever that means to you, take it to heart. It means something different to everyone. So I'd started meditation. As I said, my friend Gonzalo had inspired me. And I did this meditation for a couple of years, and then finally I realized that it was a little bit dry. For one thing, you had to pay money, good money, to learn the meditation. And that felt a little bit funny, but at that time when I was 20, 21 years old, there was nothing else around really in this small town in Midwest USA. So I paid them some money, but after a while, as I said, I started realizing I'm doing the meditation every day as they instructed, and I was having some nice experiences. Maybe not spiritual, maybe more psychological experiences, but I felt I wasn't getting very far. So eventually, through a series of incidents, I met some people from another group called Ananda Marga, which, as I said earlier to the woman, that's the meditation society that I'm involved in now. And as I said, Ananda Marga is a global service organization, primarily spiritual, but also we do a lot of social service, a lot of community service. And I met some people here and there. One man I met is still a close friend of mine more than 40 years later. So I met these people, and gradually I was attracted to them, and a little bit I knew about what they practiced and what they did. And finally, after a long time, one of their teachers came to my small town, as I say, a small town in the corner of the Midwest. And he gave a talk, a little bit like what I'm giving now. And it was very simple, actually. He just mainly talked about love and peace and meditation. Didn't say anything very profound, but something about his vibration and something about his awareness made me feel this is the right person for me to learn real meditation from. Now, a little bit about what I call real meditation. This may be a little bit technical, but one can learn meditation from many teachers, and you can learn from a book. You can sit in front of a candle if you have more patience than I did. 10 seconds probably won't get you very far in getting any realizations with a candle or with a teacher. But the first type of meditation I learned was, in a way, technical. I sat with this woman in a quiet room. I gave my money, I gave some flowers as they wanted, and she taught me a mantra. And the mantra was nice. I still remember it today. It had no meaning, though, and there was no rhythm to it. The meditation I teach and practice now is designed so that you say the mantra when you breathe in, partly, and when you breathe out. And this rhythm helps the mantra to be more deep in your mind. But also the mantras we teach have a meaning. I was sitting for 2 years with this first meditation. I was repeating the mantra every day in my mind. There was no meaning. So I had no sense of why I was doing the meditation. I had no sense of what is my purpose with the meditation. We'll do meditation, as I said, a little bit later with the mantra, which is what I call it a pre-meditation mantra, but I'll explain that to you. But it does have a meaning. And when your mantra has a meaning, in the back of your mind, perhaps in your subconscious, you remember that meaning, and it helps to give you some guidance in your life. Of course, I need not say, but I will say it, that the mantras always have a very positive meaning, a very uplifting meaning, a spiritual meaning, something to help you identify with a deeper sense of who you are. The mantra may not help you to get a better job, it may not help you to become mayor of London, it may not help you to be an Olympic gold medalist, but it will help you to feel a deeper sense of understanding of life, a deeper sense of peace, a deeper sense of what I might call spiritual happiness. So I met this teacher. My name is Dada Jyotirupananda. His name was Dada Jitendra. Dada is a title in our society, which means, in English, we might say it's somewhat equivalent to a reverend in the C of E or something like that. It's just a title. And so I met him, and he taught me the meditation in a small room in the house that they were renting at that time in my town. And what I didn't quite realize then, but what is important about the meditation, is that in our meditation practice, what makes the meditation work is that the mantra serves almost like an alarm clock. It wakes up a certain spiritual desire that everyone has inside of them. And I know, my understanding is that everyone has a certain spiritual desire. Spiritual is not the same as religion. You don't have to pray in a certain direction. You don't have to accept a certain deity or scripture. That's what we might call religion. Spirituality has to do with finding a deeper meaning in life, finding your place in the universe, connecting with some flow in the universe. It has no doctrine, no dogma involved with it. There is philosophy. We have a deep philosophy, but there's no dogmas that you must do this or else. That is more what I associate with some religions, some religious teachings. But spirituality is a way of opening your heart, opening your mind to a deeper sense of what life is all about, what the universe is. But in our practice of meditation, what makes the meditation work is partly that the teacher knows what mantra to give you, because if I was teaching meditation to everyone here, I may give a different mantra to many different people, because we're all different. We have different characteristics, different personalities, different fate, you might say. So according to something I see in your personality, I might give you a mantra that would be fit for you, but maybe not for another person. But what makes the mantra work in the practice that I teach, in the practice that we have, is that through my meditation, through the training that I've had, I work to make a connection between the student and the guru. Is anyone familiar with what a guru is? Okay, a guru is, in India, a guru is considered a spiritual teacher. It's used in other ways, but primarily it's considered a spiritual teacher. So in our practice, if there's a connection that's made between the teacher and the student, then a certain energy wakes up in the person. They may not be conscious of it at the time. It's not like an electrical shock because you put your hand in a fuse box. It's nothing like that. But it makes the meditation work when there is a connection between the teacher and the guru. Now, getting back to my main point, though, I learned meditation from this man, and then he went his way. I rarely saw him after that, but I met other teachers in Ananda Marga, so I could continue with the practices, learning more. But at some point in my life, I realized that I wanted to do something more than I was doing, just having a job and going home at night and doing some meditation, going to a movie, etc. And I found that through Ananda Marga, this meditation society, there was a way that I could volunteer my time to become not exactly a meditation teacher, but to help with some of our service projects, either teaching meditation, helping feed homeless people, helping with school, whatever it might be. So at some point in my life, I decided I've got to take a step. I've got to do something different than what I've done before. And so I decided that I would volunteer to work with Ananda Marga. It might be called, in Catholic Church, it might be called someone who is I think they would say novitiate. Someone who's, I may not be pronouncing it correctly, but someone who is perhaps maybe wanting to be a monk or a nun, but they're not quite sure, so they take on some volunteer work in the meantime. So I was doing that, and I found that my meditation and my life was becoming more fulfilled. A couple of stories I'll tell, one or two stories about mysticism, because spirituality is often connected with mystical things in life. Mystical is like from the word mystery, same root, and it may mean some experiences that are strange, unusual, hard to explain, but are real. One time I was in USA, where I lived, and I was traveling from my hometown to Denver, Colorado, about maybe 2,000 miles away, something like that, just around the corner in the USA. And I had a car which I had taken from one agency, and I was going to deliver it to somewhere else in another town. And I had been in my hometown, actually. I had gone back to my hometown because of my brother's wedding. And then the wedding was on Sunday. Monday, I decided, well, I'll leave sometime this week. I had no schedule. So Tuesday in the middle of the day, I decided, well, I'm not doing much, so let me leave Wednesday morning. So I got in the car, I had the car, so Wednesday morning I started driving. I left fairly early after breakfast, and I was driving for a good 8 hours, something like that. And I was in a state called Kansas at that time. And I was going to stop in one rest area where you can maybe get some gas, get some food, rest a little bit, use the toilet, and then you move on again. And so I got to a town called Topeka, I think that was the town, just a small city in Kansas. And I saw there was a rest area in about 5 miles. It was about 5:30 in the evening. I'd been driving, as I say, for 7, 8 hours, maybe more. And I thought, let me take a rest. And I thought, okay, in 5 miles I'll stop. But just before we got to that rest area, I saw that there was a sign saying the next rest area is in 60 miles. And I thought, it's still daytime. Let me drive in the daytime. It's easier to drive in the daytime than the nighttime. So at the last minute, I decided I'll go to this next area about an hour later. And I didn't go in the first one. I drove for another hour, and I stopped in this rest area. I parked my car. I used the bathroom. I found a quiet place a little bit in the corner where I could do meditation. Everyone around me was having their barbecue and listening to their loud music, drinking their beer. But I just wanted to do some meditation, eat something, and then I would drive again. So I had a little mat or blanket, whatever. I sat down on the grass, started doing meditation. After about a minute, I hear someone say, "Excuse me." So I opened my eyes, and there was a young couple there. They must have been in their early 30s, I guess. And he might have been an accountant, she might have been a teacher, I don't remember. But they were a couple, and they'd been together for some time. But sometimes they had problems in their relationship. I guess that's no surprise. So when they would have problems, they would go to a counselor in their hometown nearby. And this counselor was kind of a psychic counselor. She had certain mystical abilities. And she had seen them on Monday night. And Monday night she told them, if you want some answer to your problems, go to this rest area Wednesday at sunset. And you'll find someone who can give you the answers you need. So this psychic counselor knew on Monday night that they should go on Wednesday to this rest area. An hour and a half before they found me, I didn't know I was going to be in that rest area. And I guess they were logical enough to know that the people drinking beer and frying chicken were probably not the ones who would help them with their problems. So I was the only one doing something different, doing meditation, so they came. I talked to them for a while. I'm not a great counselor, at least I wasn't, and I gave them some ideas about meditation. We talked for a while, and then they went their way and I went my way. We kept a little bit of contact after that. But the question, as I'm saying, is how did that psychic counselor know that on Wednesday at sunset I would be there, when an hour and a half before then I had no idea I would be there? There are strange things in the world. Yeah. So anyway, I had been working as a volunteer with Ananda Marga for some time in USA, Seattle and Washington and Denver, in Mexico, Mexico City, Monterrey, and some other places. And finally I realized, I was in my early 30s then, I realized I need to find what I really want to do in life. Should I get married, or should I become a monk, as you see I am now? So I guess that's a rhetorical question because I think you know the answer. But at that time, I had no idea what the answer was. I was having a lot of difficulty thinking what to do. A few things happened along the way that helped me decide. One was a personal issue, which I don't want to talk about now, but it helped me see that I really need to make a choice. It wasn't a dramatic, terrible, tragic thing, but just some personal thing happened which struck me deep inside. And I realized, I really have to make a choice now. And another thing happened also. One man came to visit us in our center in Washington, D.C., where I was living. I was mainly editing a magazine or a newspaper that we had for the public, and we had feeding programs for homeless people and teaching meditation classes and other things I was doing. And this man came. He had been involved with Ananda Marga for a long time. In fact, he had been a Dada like me, but then he had decided it wasn't quite the right thing for him. And I was talking to him one day, and he said to me, I guess he knew I was not sure what I should do. And he said, you know, the work you're doing now as a volunteer, you're doing everything that a Dada, one of our monks, can do, except there's one thing you can't do, which is teach them meditation. And I started thinking in my mind that yes, to be able to teach meditation, have access to some of these secrets that I briefly indicated before about the mantra, making a connection with the guru, a spiritual connection and things like that, I started to realize that that's one thing that would really be attractive to me. And also, meditation was the most important thing I was doing in my life. So why not share that with others by being able to teach meditation? So, with his perhaps unknowing inspiration, and with the inspiration of some other people, I decided, just let me become a meditation teacher. And this was meaning a complete turnaround in my life. I would leave my comfortable USA, where I knew everything and I knew the language, I knew all the customs and all this, and I would go to India for a period of time, which I, of course, ended up doing. We have a center in Varanasi, an old castle actually, not a big one. And I would be there for a number of months doing meditation, doing a lot of other practices in a very monastic, secluded type of situation. And I was wondering still, after I talked to this man for a while, is that really what I want to do? And I went to him one day and I said, I don't know what I should do. And we talked for about an hour. He talked, I mainly listened. And at the end of that hour, I honestly can tell you I don't remember exactly what he said, but he would have said some things like I've indicated, that we must do the best thing we can with our life. And that's different for everyone. Very few people will ever become a monk or a nun. Perhaps none of you, perhaps someone here. But whatever you do in your life, what I realized that evening was, whatever you do, do the best you can. Don't settle for doing something just because you have to do something. Whether it's in your job, in your relationship, in some hobby you have, some pastime you have, something, whatever it might be, do the best thing you can in your life. The best thing to me is something that gives something back to the world. So that's how I decided to become a monk. In a brief summary, I had found over the years that meditation was the best thing I could do because it gave me a sense of inner peace. It gave me a sense of understanding that I could find nowhere else. It was not logical, it was not rational, like you might read in a book, do this and then that will happen, talk to someone, take counseling. These practical things were not what meditation was about. But somehow, through meditation year after year, I started to find that questions in my mind were all of a sudden answered. Again, as I say, not in a logical or rational way, but through meditation, if one goes deep enough into meditation, one can access certain layers, certain parts of the mind, and you might say the heart or the soul, that are not something you can find through counseling, through courses in the university. Things that are, you might say, buried inside of you or deep inside of you, and you're not aware of them. But meditation, the quietness of meditation, the stillness of meditation, the focus of meditation can, perhaps you have to be lucky or perhaps you just have to be determined, it can help you to find these deeper answers. Things, as I've said before, are not logical, not rational, but they are real, very real. But I find that only through meditation can these answers come. And so I decided at one point, after years of struggle, denial, attractions here, attractions there, I finally had to admit that the best thing I could do in my life was to become, as we call it, a monk. Yeah. Or we should be ending at 9 o'clock. Is that right, Paris?
Yeah, you can have a run of it if you want.
Okay. Well, how about, since I've been talking a little bit about meditation, which is really the main thing, because as I say, I don't foresee that people are necessarily going to line up to become monks or nuns. That would be great if it's the right thing for you. because, as I'm saying, do the best thing you can in life, but also do what's right. Not what someone else wants you to do, but do the thing that's right for you. Yeah. And I think I found what's right for me.